Welcome back. Now we're going to talk about different type of compensation strategies, some of their some of their benefits and some of their drawbacks. So let's use a simple model to express the potential benefits of a fixed wage system. And then from there, we'll move on to looking at a wage system that ties compensation to effort or to output. So starting out with the fixed wages, we're going to use a simple linear function. So basically, it's going to be a straight line. So output from the worker is a function of effort, represented by the capital E, and firm-specific factors that are beyond the worker's control, as represented by V. So, for instance, a new, better machine that a worker is working with in the production process is going to increase V. It's going to make them more productive and has nothing to do with their effort. On the other hand, that same machine breaking down is going to decrease V. Again, it's not the worker's effort that's causing this decrease in production. It's something else at the firm that they can't control. Now, we assume that the letter alpha is going to be a constant, say like the number 2, which is why we end up with a straight line. The worker is able to largely determine their own output in this case. So think of like a beer vendor at a sporting event, which is an incredibly important job. Of course, how large their beer holder is going to affect how much they can sell, how many, they can carry with them at one time. So that's going to be V there, not something they can control through effort. But in this case, their effort is going to be a huge determinant of how many beers they're going to sell. Are they walking throughout the section, constantly yelling that they have beer? That kind of effort stuff is going to be captured in the capital E. And it's going to be important to determine their output. But sometimes in industries, their level of effort isn't strongly related to what their output is going to be. So, for example, an assembly line worker may have less control. If you imagine like the conveyor belt assembly line in that episode of I Love Lucy, where it's just constantly moving through and they have to, I think that was like the chocolate that they were working with. If their output is mostly controlled by the speed of the conveyor belt, then effort is going to have a very low impact on their output. So in this case, comparing the beer seller to the assembly line worker, the beer seller is going to have a much steeper line, as their effort is going to have a much larger impact on their output. Our assembly line worker is going to need a large increase in effort to improve their output by even a little bit. So they'll have a much more shallow line. Now, figure 11.2, W represents the fixed wage rate that's being paid by the firm to the worker. So for a given wage level, W, the worker chooses how much effort to bring and how much revenue they're going to make for the firm. Now, firms are going to require some minimum level of effort. So in this case, let's say E1. At this level of effort, the worker's revenue will be above their wage at a point that will cover the fixed cost of operation. Now, management must ensure that workers actually put forth the minimum effort required and agreed upon. On the last slide, we saw the workers, so the slide from the ending slide from the previous lecture, that workers have an incentive to try to lower their level of effort below E1, because if they could keep the same wage, less effort would move them to a better indifference group. So they're getting higher utility at that indifference group. So shirking is their optimal move in this case, especially if they can avoid detection from management. Also, if the wage is not high enough, the risk of being fired isn't that great. It's much worse to lose a higher paying job than it is to lose a lower paying job when you can go out and find another similar lower paying job. But managers can also increase workers' effort, moving them from E1 to E2. If they're able to do this, that can increase will increase a firm's profit. So maybe it's them putting more effort into recruiting motivated and talented workers who care about their job, building up a really good team that helps, encourage other workers, the existing workers to want to work harder. Maybe they're able to use better management tactics to make their employees happy and to keep encouraging them and to, design production in a way that makes each worker more productive and makes them willing to expend more effort. Maybe they really try to make the firm having a mission that the employees are willing to work towards, and that inspires them to put forth more effort. Whatever the reason being, if they're able to move them from effort level like E1 to E2, so increase their level of effort, they can increase the profitability of firms. So management can be very important, and good management tactics and style and all that can be very important for increasing a firm's success. Another method of influencing worker effort is to try to tie compensation explicitly to their effort. So firms can use higher wages to induce workers to put forth more effort, allowing them to choose the effort wage mix more explicitly. So figure 11.3 here shows the type of contract, comparing it to a fixed wage contract. So we can represent this performance pay based on using incentives based on the individual worker's effort with the following equation. So W, their wage, equals B plus beta E. So the wage is going to be W. It's equal to a performance bond that the worker can think of pays to get a job. So think of it as a guarantee against the failure to meet the obligations in the contract. So typically workers don't actually pay a bond up front. In this case, it's going to be what's equal to the producer's surplus. Again, E is the level of effort like we saw before, and beta is the coefficient that determines the slope of that curve. So now this type of payment scheme solves some of the issues related to fixed wages from our previous slide. So on this graph, point A represents the wage and the effort combination we talked about on the previous slide in figure 1.2. Only a worker who has an indifference curve that's tangent to point A would choose to work there. If they had an indifference curve tangent to below point A, so if they desired a lower level of effort than point A, they would choose not to work at the firm because the effort required at that job is greater than what they were willing to give for the job. So in this example, a worker is willing to supply effort at E2. That's where the indifference curve U is tangent to the wage line. So they'll supply effort at the level of E2 if they can earn the wage W2. Now, what this pay system does is encourages workers who are willing to supply the necessary effort to self-select into the firm. It's easier for management to go through the hiring process and know if the workers are going to be willing to put forth the effort because they're tying that pay to the effort. So this is going to make the hiring process easier for them. So at the research center I work for through the university, we don't do performance pay, but we try to use a filtering mechanism to make sure that new hires are willing to put forth the necessary effort. So this reduces the actual management costs and the amount of effort and time you have to expend managing the team members. So there's less time directly supervising. We put a lot of effort into that hiring process. Performance pay is a way to not have to put so much effort into that hiring process because the employees self-select into it. Only those willing to put forth that effort are going to be the ones applying and going through the process for that job. So in this model, workers at a firm will fall anywhere above point A, which is the minimum established effort at that firm. They can lie anywhere above point A on the W star line. So we're going to see a large variation in payment, especially much larger than we saw in a company with a fixed wage line. Because again, workers are choosing a level of effort that corresponds with their utility. It's not going, and they're going to be encouraged to go anywhere along that line because they can earn more money for putting forth more effort. Because effort is difficult to measure in practice, firms are going to link wages to output instead, and that's typically what they do. So think of sales reps being paid on commission rather than the more vague effort that they're putting forth. Now, there are some difficulties worth mentioning with performance pay. So despite the benefits we talked about for performance pay, which I think are fairly substantial, the most common type of payment structure is still hourly wage rates. Now, there's several reasons why this is the case. So in many jobs, it's difficult to actually measure an individual's output. Sure, we can see how many sales rep makes, but what about an assistant or a professor? In these cases, it's much more difficult to try to measure their output. So if output can't easily and clearly link effort and payment, it's not going to work. Now, it may also take a long time to measure the effort of an individual worker. So for some professions that require high skills and a large stock of knowledge, and some that require developing and maintaining relationships with clients, it's going to take a long time. And initial attempts at measuring the effort, so looking, in the early years, is going to be much more difficult. Now, some workers have little effect on their output through their effort, like the assembly line worker I mentioned earlier. If they're not going to have much effect on their output through the level of effort that they choose, then tying compensation to their effort isn't really going to impact the firm's bottom line at all, and it makes it difficult or maybe too costly to use that type of payment structure. Other times, worker output is linked to others in the production process. So it's team-based output rather than each individual having their own clear contributions. So if you try to tie pay to production, in this case, to try to get at the effort, it's going to be more difficult because it's hard to determine who is responsible for what or for how much of the final product. You also end up with the problems of free riders. These are going to be people that co-spy with little effort because others are willing to supply the effort. So they don't work very hard, but because the job gets done, it's as if they get credit for it. So pretty much everyone in college courses had to deal with group presentations that one person doesn't pull their weight, but still gets the grade at the end. So that's an example of a free rider. And not only do you overpay those who put forth little effort, but over time, it's going to encourage everyone to shirk, and that's going to drive down production. Also, if workers have to perform several tasks, each of these tasks have to contribute to their wages, or they'll tend to focus on the ones that impact wages, ignoring or limiting how much effort they're going to put into their other tasks. Likewise, you have to make sure that each of these tasks receives a payment level at the ratio you want the tasks performed. If you don't do that, workers are going to do more of what pays the most, or if everything is paid equally, but one requires more effort than the other, they'll put more effort in the one that requires less effort. They will focus on that more to, increase their salary by the same amount, but to put in the lower amount of effort. So again, you end up with basically not the right mix of all those tasks being done. And it can be very difficult for a firm to try to determine the proper pay rate across those several tasks. Finally, these systems are open to manipulation where workers try to find ways to technically meet the requirements with, in a way that requires putting forth the smallest amount of effort. There's an idea called Goddard's law that says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Precisely because people are going to be willing to manipulate it and do it in the way that requires the least amount of effort. Now, another thing you can do is try to link the employee's wages to a firm's overall performance, a way to get around the difficulties with performance pay. This is a more direct measure, so it's the goal for managers is to maximize the profitability of a firm. So if you tie their a worker's pay to the firm's performance, you're targeting your goal more directly. And in theory, it helps to align the incentives between the worker and the firm's management. So typically the way they do this is through ownership of stock in a company. So, when the company does better, the worker's portfolio does better, they have more money. It encourages workers to contribute to the overall performance of the firm rather than maximizing their take-home pay. Because they will be maximizing their take-home pay if the firm is doing better, rather than just focusing on maximizing their take-home pay by increasing their production, or whatever metric the firm is using to the highest level possible. So in some cases, maximizing their output might actually be wasteful. You imagine the case that they're just producing as many as possible, a bunch of them sit on the shelves, they're actually not being sold. So with stock ownership, employees would be incentivized to stop production when they reach that point. They're trying to make the firm as profitable as possible, not just meet their own targets. However, it may be difficult for employees to realize the point that they should stop producing or what to do to make the firm as profitable as possible. In larger companies, most workers are going to have little effect on the overall performance of the firm. So they may end up, rooting for the firm, watching CNBC every day, but above and beyond that, little that they actually do in their day-to-day job is going to help their paycheck or help the stock price of the firm. Another way that firms can go about trying to maximize employee effort is what's called the work-life incentive scheme. So under work-life incentive schemes, future wages are contingent on the quality, performance, and high effort today. And it's try to design it in a way such that it encourages maximum effort at each point along a employee's career. So it's kind of like the piece rate system, but it's going to extend the production period over a much longer horizon. So we're looking at the entire career of employee at that company rather than just looking at like the output per day or per week or something like that. So early in a worker's career, workers are underpaid compared to their marginal revenue product. What the firm does is they induce effort by promising the worker steady pay raises throughout their career, which eventually and fairly quickly takes them above their marginal revenue product. So workers are underpaid initially with the promise of being overpaid later. So my apologies, but I'm going to give you yet another equation. So we can represent this with the equation G is greater than theta times W minus W star times N. So G is going to be the utility gain or the gain the employee gets from taking the job. Theta is the probability of getting caught shirking and being fired. W is the annual wage earnings, and W star is the alternate wage a worker could earn working at a similar firm. And finally, N is the number of years that the worker expects to work at the firm. So the firm can increase the cost of shirking, and they can, which the goal of that is to reduce shirking through either increasing monitoring for shirking, so increasing the likelihood of getting caught, or increasing the difference between wages and potential wages elsewhere. If firms can't make it more likely to catch workers shirking, increasing this theta, they can still deter shirking by increasing lifetime wage differential. So by paying workers more than they could get at a similar firm. So figure 11.5 shows this graphically. So the VMP is a marginal product for a worker across their career. It starts out low as young workers that develop the least industry or job specific skills of their career, and they build over time. I've been working 4 years now, and I'm much more skilled in my job now than I was when I first started. It just takes that much time to learn the ins and outs of whatever you're doing. Eventually, it's going to peak, though, and begins to fall, as age catches up with us. W is the wages paid by the firm. It's going to start below the VMP and below alternate wages from, other firms. This is when the worker is still being underpaid. Until time T0, the worker is going to be underpaid relative to their VMP. But W is going to increase throughout a worker's career, despite the fact that their VMP peaks at a certain point and begins to decline. So workers are paid a surplus. So the wage is going to be greater than the VMP later in their career. So what this does in practice is it encourages young workers to supply effort and encourages them to build their human capital early on in their careers. Now, as a worker ages, the cost of shirking or the foregone salary for being fired after they get caught shirking starts to shrink. So this could encourage shirking. However, because they're being paid more than the VMP, this premium increases the cost of being caught and fired. So it's going to reduce their likelihood to shirk as well. So this wage practice is going to increase the benefit of putting forth effort over the lifetime of their career. Now, many firms are going to use a probationary period. So this is when the worker is closely being monitored early on in their career. They're typically paid at a much lower wage, and their responsibilities slowly scale up over the time. So their starting wage may be set below W star, like we saw in the previous example. After a certain amount of time, the low productivity, low effort workers are going to be let go, while the other ones that are putting forth enough effort, that are productive enough, are being promoted and given the higher regular salary after the probationary period. Another way to discourage shirking is to tie regular increases in pay to a performance review. So merit pay increases with increased productivity. Or management could set clear objectives, specific targets, and give bonuses for anyone who exceeds those targets. Now, bonuses are one-time payments where, on the other hand, merit pay are permanent increases in the salary. So bonuses they can be quite large, whereas because they're one time, whereas the merit pay increases may seem smaller, but you get those every single year. They still come with issues that workers may not have a large effect on meeting firm-wide targets. So it depends on the targets for either bonuses or merit pay, whether it's individual, like what the worker actually does, or whether it's based on firm performance. And again, we still have the free rider problem if we have those firm level performance, or if it's based on, or if it's a firm where the workers are producing as members of teams. So, again, it's difficult to tell who exactly is doing what. They're responsible for what portion of the production. Another way to decrease shirking is by having multiple layers of opportunities for promotion and pay raises throughout. They call this tournament theory because the pay raises function like a competition. Tournaments are similar to the merit pay increases in that they're dependent on regular reviews and they're based on the effort and productivity of workers. And finally, the last one is non-wage benefits, fringe benefits. They're also called non-pecuniary benefits by economists. These can be used to enhance the work-life incentive. So the value of fringe benefits typically increases with a worker's tenure. So young workers will later receive a payoff for later years of good work. And for older workers who have less time left, and for them, shirking, the opportunity cost of being caught shirking is much lower. Now we're increasing their benefit from working even more. They have the wages and now they have these fringe benefits.